So, SCI 139, Biology of Plants and Animals. This is section 1, chapter 1. There isn't a lot to this chapter. This is mostly my chance of kind of easing you into how this works. It would be true if we were in a classroom doing this, or it's true doing the videos, although there's things about the videos that make it a little bit different. For one thing, the video system decides what it wants to make look good, and its default is to find a face and do it with a face, which means that sometimes it will put me the way that it wants me lit in this frame, and then this will get way brighter than it really should be. And you'll notice sometimes this just flashes, it gets really bright, and I'll step forward and you won't really know what I'm doing. But what I'm doing is reaching out, and see, it just flashed. And touching the screen on the screen back there to say to the computer, that's what I want you to focus on. Now, a lot of times I'll start a lecture with a cartoon. On the screen, you probably can't really read it. Hopefully you can see it. It's a guy with a tie sitting at an overhead projector. That's what I use to do the lectures. And underneath it goes, eventually, Billy came to dread his father's lectures over all other forms of punishment. And he's diagramming things about the path of the ball in the window and all. You can pretty much figure out what Billy's in trouble for. But I do use an overhead projector, which means I step over there and I write stuff down and it shows up there. And what I'm expecting you to do is follow along and take notes. What does that mean? I don't write a lot. Is that if you've looked at my notes are very brief. It just tells me what I want me to talk about, and I remember the details, and I put some of the details down, and then I kind of step back and I talk about other details. What you need to figure out as we go along is how much of the stuff that's not here needs to be on your paper so that it will make sense to you later. Because nothing's, great if you're looking at your notes and all you've done is write what I have on the overhead and you're going, I don't really remember the rest of the stuff he talked about it. I guess I gotta sit through those videos again. You need to do that, you need to do that, but getting good at writing notes that you can then make sense of later is a pretty good skill to have. College education, you get a lot of jobs where you'll go to a meeting. I do that. I go to a meeting with a pad and I write stuff down as we go along and I remember later. It's like, how do I do that on the Blackboard system again? Oh yeah, I wrote it down. And I still have the problem where occasionally I think I've written down enough that it'll make sense later. And then it doesn't always do that. But I have a theory, hypothesis about writing on the overhead. People, there are tactile learners that like to do hands-on stuff, and there's visual learners that remember stuff they see better, and auditory learners that remember stuff they hear better. And this kind of hits all three. Watching someone actually write, I think, skews people that are tactile learners, kind of the feel the writing, so that it helps them remember. And of course, hearing me helps the auditory learners, and seeing the words helps the visual learners, more so than a PowerPoint does. And I'm not a big fan of PowerPoints anyway. PowerPoints, I think, you throw a whole bunch of stuff up all at once, and while I'm talking, people are reading ahead, and then they lose track of what I was saying, and they kind of lose track in general. And I think PowerPoints are an excellent way to make people go to sleep. So I don't do PowerPoints. I mean, I may be able to make you go to sleep without PowerPoints, but I'm trying not to. Okay. Everyone just calm down and we'll try this thing one more time. Is that you may find that the things I'm asking you to do are tricky, and the first time you try them doesn't work all that well. Doesn't mean you can't get it to work right. Especially you get the thing back, you can talk to me and go, what did I not do here? Because last semester I had a student who was really upset with her the mark on the first paper, and we sat down and I went through and I said, well, you needed to do this, you need to do this, see the directions say to do this, and you didn't do that. And her second paper was great. She was mad at me for a while because, as I said in the introduction, I'm gonna expect you to follow the directions, and you'll lose points for not following the directions. And I know that's annoying. I tell you, it's annoying in the real world too, where you fill out your forms and then you submit them, And the person on the other side of the desk knows, no, you didn't do this right. You got to go back and get another form and fill it out right. It's frustrating, but the better you are at doing it, the fewer the times the person hands it back to you and tells you got to go do this again. So yeah, I'm annoying. I'm hoping I'm giving you a skill. I'm not going to write a lot down for this particular chapter because it is kind of introductory, but what we're going to find in the first few chapters, I tend to take a historical approach to the subject. Whoops. And the reason, see, the lighting changed when it didn't have that to look at. The reason is we can build on older knowledge and build in newer knowledge, simpler knowledge to more complex knowledge. Because remember, human beings have been around for a long time, and we're not all that different from our ancestors. Our ancestors looked at the world and went, can we figure this out? Can we figure out what's happening? Because if we can figure out what's happening, we can kind of make predictions about it, and we can live more comfortably if we know what's going to happen based on what we know. But what we know was pretty limited and was put together with the basis of knowledge that people worked with. Because sometimes we look and go, they really thought that there was a guy up on the mountain throwing the thunderbolts? Well, what else were they going to work with? Nobody had gotten up to the top of those mountains. There were clouds up there. And how many times have you yelled at your car for doing something? Or kicked something, some inanimate object that you're legitimately mad at because you feel like it did something to you. Is that we have a natural tendency to kind of see the world kind of like it's other entities that have some sort of intent toward us. They're either mad at us or they're doing bad things to us, or your car's just trying to frustrate you. Well, people have been that way for forever. And to think that the world had intent. Originally, we tended to think as people that things were imbued with the same sort of spirit as we have, that there were spirits in the trees and spirits in the streams and spirits in the snow. Eventually, as we got better at kind of controlling our own environment, as we started to explain more things in terms of gods that were kind of like people but bigger with more power. If we only had enough power, we could change the weather, we could, throw thunderbolts, we could do other sorts of things. And so gods became kind of expanded human beings, but with a lot of the same emotional foibles and problems. It's taken us a while to kind of lose that idea that eventually the controlling powers became less and less people-like and more abstract. And then eventually it was, as we learned more and more, we actually started to get the idea that maybe we could actually figure it out. We didn't need bigger kind of invisible powers telling us how the rain came or how the snow came, is that we could actually figure out the bits and pieces of it. And that's how science was built. But it's a reflection of what we know and who we are. And it's a concept that'll come up in the science chapter called postmodernism, that things that people make are a product of people, and it reflects our expectations and our prejudices and all sorts of things that make us people. And it can skew what we think is happening because we tend to infuse our own biases into things. Also, as people, we don't only want to explain stuff, we want to understand how things are related to one another. When you lived in villages and there were other villages, knowing who was related to whom and who was responsible for whom and whose ancestors came from where was an important part of the world. And so extending that to the natural world and get to label things and decide what's related to things is something called taxonomy or classification. We could do a whole chapter on that. But it's, again, a feature of human beings. We want to see connections and understand connections. And originally, as far as the world was concerned, we kind of grouped things into three different groups that we call kingdoms, because that's what people grouped as at that point. The animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, the mineral kingdom. The mineral kingdom, eventually we got to the point where we realized rocks were significantly different than living things. So we worked with the animal and plant kingdom for what we call biology for a while. And then we split it off as we learned more and more about what makes things similar or different. And that we'll talk about in the classification chapter. But that's kind of an introduction to the way that the course is going to work. Is that you'll listen to the lectures, they're pinned to certain dates that we would have covered them when we were actually in class. I will tell you, late in the semester are videos that I made last year, and they may start with posted office hours that are not the same as the office hours I'm doing this semester, or I may completely redo the videos. I haven't quite decided yet. Is that the format? I shifted from this format to that format in order to better put stuff on YouTube. So some of the older, you'll know it's a really old video if it's horizontal rather than vertical. But I'm gonna probably redo a lot of those. But that's the way the course works. It's like you were in a classroom with me. I'm sorry you don't get a chance to interact with me and ask questions that I can answer in front of the group. But you can email me questions, and I can answer in other emails or emails to the group. I won't single you out as having asked the question if you ask a question that I feel kind of everybody needs to have addressed. Because I always figure, if somebody asks a question, they're not the only person in the room that's not understanding whatever it is they have a question about. Is usually there's at least a quarter of the room going, oh, thank God somebody asked that because I was lost on the same point. But not everybody has the self-confidence to ask a question because they feel like they're going to embarrass themselves. They're going to look like they don't understand, like somehow that denigrates them or makes them less. It's a good quality to have. I'm sure I'd look silly sometimes. And there are times where I don't do stuff because I'm afraid I'm going to look silly because that's people. But asking questions is not a terrible thing. Getting used to asking questions when you really have a question is not a bad thing. So that's pretty much the first chapter. That makes this a pretty short video compared to the videos for the later chapters.